Hi everyone and welcome back as I take a look at a selective number of episodes from Blake's 7. I will go into a bit more of my opinions at the end of each video as I give the synopsis of the storyline. So here we go. Episode 1, The Way Back. Blake is in it looks like a dome city, and he's a citizen of the Federation. But Blake doesn't know he has undergone treatment. Now, why has he undergone this treatment? Well, this is revealed as the episode goes along, where he meets this woman who introduces him to this man who take Blake outside the city to meet dissidents, and they are being tailed by another person, and that person turns out to be a Federation spy. They try to jog Blake's memory, and he's saying, I've had no treatment, I've not had my memory realtered, and so on, and it fails, basically, until he meets this dissident. Now, this man was part of the rebellion led by Blake. He was part of his group, and he does sort of jogs Blake's memory to a point, and Blake sort of walks off to have a think about what was said in the discussion, and Blake witnesses Federation security forces moving in on the dissidents. Little the dissidents know, as they form assembly into a meeting, coming up with ideas how to disrupt things and make life pretty hard for the Federation. The Federation security forces surround them, and in typical Federation style, carry out a massacre. They're all slaughtered, except for Blake, who was a little bit away from the group and out of the sight of the Federation security forces. Now, Blake is, or was, a problem for the Federation, which they dealt with. But now the problem has re-emerged. Blake witnesses the massacre in the terms of the bodies. He doesn't actually see the shooting, but he sees the aftermath. Blake makes his way back to the Dome City, and of course he is then immediately intercepted by Federation security forces. He's thrown in prison. He's sort of interrogated by a doctor. He basically says, go away, I don't want your drugs. I'm not interested, go away, I know what I saw, blah, blah, blah. And this causes a problem for the administration. Now, the administration knows there are supporters of Blake, and at the show trial, the original show trial, none of these people believed a word of it. And they daren't kill Blake, so they got to come up with a way of discrediting Blake, and they do. Unfortunately, there is a weak link, because the man who they appoint to defend Blake comes round to sort of thinking along what Blake is telling him. Now, basically, it starts off, his defence counsel shows him the list of charges all against minors. Blake says this is rubbish. I am not guilty of any of these charges. I am only guilty of basically setting foot out of the city to a meeting of outside people who were in turn, they were massacred by Federation security forces. Now, he gets talking to his defence counsel, and his defence counsel is sort of wondering. wondering, is Blake telling the truth? Anyway, Blake goes on trial. He's found guilty and he's sentenced to life on Cygnus Alpha. And at this point, Blake protests against the charges and he's promptly knocked out by a hypo. Not before he turns around and he sees Dev Tarrant, the man who betrayed the dissidents. And he realises he's been completely stitched up by the Federation. And as the Federation see it, they have now rid themselves of the Blake problem by having him shipped off to the penile colony on Cygnus Alpha. Now, while waiting in transit, Blake meets Jenna. He also meets Villa. Now, these two will become main characters as the series goes along. And he basically gets their backstory of each character. Villa is a thief. He says he's had his mind worked on, but they can't cure him. He's an absolute thief. Jenna was a smuggler who got caught. She basically tells Blake, look, you are here, you've been found guilty, there's no way you're going to get out. And that is it, even though he had this sort of brief meeting with his defence counsellor, who in turn is actually looking for evidence. Now, his defence counsellor does find some evidence about the miners. Apparently, they weren't in school on a certain day, and all three of them attended a clinic. Obviously, their minds had been re-altered. Now, he takes this back to Blake to talk about, and Blake basically tells him about the distance, the outside, how far away from the Dome City they were, which direction to go, so on. And his defence counsel does exactly that. He goes looking for the final proof. But unfortunately, he's already talked to his boss, who is one of those involved in stitching up Blake. So unfortunately for him, his days are numbered. Anyway, he finds the place where the meeting was. He finds the bodies, but is then promptly dealt with. Meanwhile, Blake, Jenna and Villa and the rest of the prisoners are escorted on to the spaceship that will depart Earth and take them to Cygnus Alpha. Blake is still, has these high hopes of getting out before takeoff, but this isn't going to happen because Dev Tarrant has dealt with his defence counsel, you could say, and arranged an accident. So the Federation at this point have done their job, and as far as they are concerned, the Blake problem has now been finally dealt with. All the loose ends are tied up neatly, and yes, that of course means his defence counsel has been eliminated. So that looks like to be the end of the Blake problem. He's on his way to Cygnus Alpha. And that, for the Federation, is great news. But this great news is short-lived, as we will discover in the episode 2 of the first series, why it becomes short-lived, and we get introduced to other characters that will play quite a considerable role in the series. So, on that note, folks, I'm going to move on to my comments. Right, my general comments. Now, Blake Seven, like Doctor Who, were made by the BBC, so there obviously wasn't going to be big money in this. Overall, yes, it does look dated compared to today's standards, but I'm not too bothered about that because I accept the time frame it was made. I think it was around about the late 1970s. So, the way back, what have we learnt from this particular episode? Well, we have obviously been introduced to the main character, Blake, because he is the central character of the first and second series, and he pops up in the third and fourth series, but that is much later on down the road. Now, we know that Blake led a revolt against the Federation and it failed. He's obviously been under observation by the administration, and they obviously knew that this sort of thing could happen, that he will eventually get to the truth, and that's exactly what happens. What do we know about the Federation? Well, we know the Federation is a ruthless organisation. There's no doubt about it. It's an organisation that suppresses its citizens by drug control and stitches people up in trials and, without hesitation, eliminate people with the Federation Security Forces. We also meet two other main characters, that of Jenna, who becomes Blake's number two, you could say. She does side with Blake most of the time, but not on the odd occasion. Sometimes she won't side with him. And of course, we meet Villa, who is a thief, and then also he is an expert at picking locks. But that's a bit later on down the line. So we've now met three of the main characters, and we got a idea of the Federation. The Federation is a corrupt organisation. It's a dystopian nightmare. Simple as that. If you step out of line and you'll get slapped down by the Federation. Simple as that. So, three characters are now introduced to us. More are on the way. So overall, yeah, The Way Back is a good starting episode. It introduces us to the Federation. It introduces us to the main character, that of Blake, and two other characters a bit later in the episode. So we've been introduced to three main characters overall, and the dystopian nightmare future life under the Federation. So, yeah, The Way Back is a good opening episode. And on that note, folks, catch you on the next one in due course. Goodbye.